Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail, slowly, softly, across the Aegean Sea. The waves are lazy tonight, just whispering against the wooden hull as you drift toward a pale, sleeping island, Crete. The air smells of salt and thyme, and somewhere far inland, a goat bells faintly against the twilight. You probably won't survive this voyage. Historically speaking, ancient sea travel wasn't exactly the safest bedtime story. But let's pretend you do. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, post your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where in the world everyone is unwinding. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The boat drifts closer, and the shoreline of Crete rises before you, long fingers of rock and scrub brushing into a turquoise sea. It's around 2000 BCE, give or take a sleepy century. The people here, the Minoans, have built a world that doesn't shout for attention. There are no towering pyramids, no grim ziggurats stacked like divine staircases. Instead, everything feels open, fluid, like the sea they live beside. As you step onto the sand, your sandals scuff against pebbles smoothed by millennia of waves. A path winds upward through olive trees, silver leaves turning the dusk into shimmer. You pass a low wall of sandstone, its surface carved by time, and you can almost feel the warmth it's stored all day, now slowly releasing into your palms. Up ahead, a cluster of soft-edged buildings leans into a hillside, pale, earthy, and irregular, as if they grew from the soil rather than sat upon it. The Minoans weren't obsessed with symmetry. They were comfortable with curves, angles, and the practical shapes that light and air demanded. Their architecture wasn't about control, it was about cooperation with nature. You notice this immediately, even before you know what to call it. The sound of the sea never really leaves your ears here. Every open courtyard seems designed to let it drift through, and that's deliberate. Archaeologists think Minoan builders oriented their palaces and homes to channel breezes, using open corridors and recessed courtyards to keep things cool. In a way, you're walking through the first examples of what modern architects might call passive climate design. No air conditioning, no glass towers, just smart, gentle craftsmanship. You pause beside a low stairway carved directly into the bedrock, leading to what looks like a storage room or maybe a workshop. The stones are uneven, but worn smooth by countless feet. Somewhere behind you, a woman's laughter echoes, a trader or artisan heading home before nightfall. You imagine the smells: olive oil, clay dust, a faint sweetness of honey wine. And here's a fun, slightly bizarre fact to file away for later. Historians believe that the Minoans used crushed shells and volcanic ash mixed into their plaster, which made the walls glimmer faintly in sunlight. Imagine that, homes that literally shimmered, the ancient equivalent of mood lighting. You reach a plateau and look out across the valley. Terraces ripple down toward the sea, each one carved and cultivated, dotted with tiny houses. In the distance, something larger rises, a palace, but not in the sense you might expect. No battlements, no fortress walls, no sense of threat. Just layer upon layer of open rooms, stairs, and balconies, an elegant sprawl known later as Knossos. Historians still argue whether the term palace is even right for Knossos. Some say it was more like an administrative center, a blend of residence, warehouse, temple, and community hub. Others think it might have been a sort of ceremonial complex, where trade, religion, and social gatherings blurred together. Either way, it feels alive, even in its stillness. As you walk closer, your footsteps echo softly through an open passageway. Columns rise, narrow at the base, wider at the top, painted in ochre red, their capitals blackened by age. These inverted columns are a Minoan signature, carved from cypress wood and designed to withstand earthquakes. They seem to defy logic, thickening upward like the trunks of upside-down trees. You tilt your head, half expecting them to sway with the wind.
And that's another thing about Minoan design. It moves. The light moves, the air moves, even the architecture seems to ripple with life. It's almost as if they didn't want their buildings to feel separate from the earth. There's an ease to it, a softness that most ancient structures never had. You can't help thinking, this isn't a civilization obsessed with power. It's one obsessed with beauty, balance, and maybe comfort. There's a whisper of sandal soles against plaster. You turn and see a group of workers passing by, carrying clay jars, their bodies lean from labor. One pauses to adjust his robe and glances at you briefly before vanishing through an archway. You realize these people built everything around you with their hands. No cranes, no iron tools, no blueprints pinned to the wall. Just human intuition, years of inherited skill, and maybe a healthy disregard for right angles. You pass a small fresco, what's left of one anyway. It shows a dolphin leaping among red coral, painted in smooth, confident strokes. You smile. It's such a happy detail to survive 4,000 years. The Minoans loved the sea, not just as a trade route, but as a kind of muse. Their art, their architecture, their very sense of life, all shimmer with maritime rhythm. And yet, for all this openness, there's mystery too. You can feel it in the shadows between the pillars. No defensive walls protected Knossos, no army garrisons. Historians still argue whether that meant the Minoans were unusually peaceful or just confident in their navy's strength. Either way, it says something remarkable. They built for living, not for fighting. A cool wind stirs through the courtyard. The light wells, those vertical shafts carved deep into the structure, glow faintly as the day fades. They were the Minoans' answer to darkness, channeling sunlight into even the lowest chambers. Somewhere inside, the faint trickle of water suggests an early form of plumbing. Yes, they had that too. You make a mental note. Ancient Crete, unexpectedly cozy. You find a quiet corner, maybe once a storeroom or a servant's hall, now just an echoing shell. Dust catches in the light, swirling lazily. You lean against a wall still faintly cool from the stone, listening to the hum of crickets outside. Somewhere far below, waves break against the cliffs, repeating the same lullaby they've sung since the Bronze Age. You breathe out. The air tastes faintly of lime and salt, and for a moment you can imagine what it must have felt like to live here, to wake to sunlight pouring through an open window, to hear the sea in every silence, to walk barefoot across smooth stone floors polished by 1,000 mornings. Maybe that's the quiet magic of Minoan architecture. It wasn't designed to dominate nature, but to live alongside it. Their walls didn't separate, they connected. Rooms to sky, home to earth, people to one another. In that sense, the buildings themselves feel almost alive, breathing softly with the rhythm of the island. And as the first stars appear above Crete's dark silhouette, you realize that in the great theater of history, the Minoans didn't shout, they whispered. And somehow, that whisper has carried for 4,000 years. You walk further into Knossos, the heart of Minoan life, where the idea of what a palace should be quietly unravels. There are no high walls to keep anyone out, no heavy gates clanging shut at dusk. Instead, space opens and breathes. The air drifts easily between corridors, courtyards, and terraces, as if the builders trusted the island itself to offer protection. You realize, with a slow exhale, that this isn't a fortress. It's a conversation with sunlight, wind, and time. The Minoans, as far as anyone can tell, never built their world around fear. Their architecture reflects that, fluid, inviting, almost social in its structure. The rooms spill into one another, hallways lead to unexpected courtyards, and every open space seems designed to let you see and be seen. There's no single throne room looming over everything. Instead, there's balance.
human scale, and natural rhythm. You step onto a flagstone terrace, the surface smooth from centuries of sandals. Beneath your feet lies a design of interlocking stones so carefully arranged that not even a sprig of grass can pry its way through. The edges curve, not because of clumsy craftsmanship, but because the Minoans preferred organic flow to rigid geometry. They built like the sea moved, softly, persistently, with no need for straight lines to prove their skill. As you wander through, the space unfolds like a labyrinth, but not the terrifying one of Greek myth. This one feels almost meditative. Each corner reveals another quiet courtyard, another column catching the afternoon light. Historians still argue whether these architectural layers were deliberate symbolism, a reflection of Minoan cosmology, or simply a practical response to expansion over time. Either way, you can't help but feel that you're walking through something designed as much for the senses as for function. A shaft of light slides across a wall ahead, illuminating traces of faded fresco. You move closer, and there they are. Bright reds, deep blues, soft ochres, all fragments of dolphins, lilies, and dancers frozen mid-motion. The paint, surprisingly vivid, was made from natural pigments, iron oxide for red, ozerite for blue, and even crushed shells for that luminous sheen. You can almost imagine the Minoan artisans standing here millennia ago, paintbrushes in hand, chatting softly as they layered myth and life together. A thought drifts by. This place wasn't built just for kings. Archaeologists suspect that Knossos functioned more like a hub, a combination of administration, trade, ceremony, and residence. People came here to offer goods, attend rituals, and celebrate the cycles of the year. In a way, the architecture acted like a social network before the internet, an open design connecting everyone through shared spaces. The scent of plaster dust and olive oil seems to hang in the air. You pause by an open stairway spiraling upward, its edges slightly chipped but still elegant. It leads toward what once might have been an upper courtyard, now bathed in sunlight. You climb slowly, the steps worn concave by countless feet, and at the top, the view opens. Roofs at staggered heights, terraces with shallow pools for cooling, and a horizon that stretches to the sea. The place feels like it's still breathing, exhaling warmth into the breeze. Here's a fun architectural quirk for you. Minoan palaces didn't have roofs the way modern buildings do. Instead, they used wooden beams and flat clay-covered terraces, creating open upper floors where people could dry fruits, watch stars, or simply let the evening wind wash over them. Imagine your apartment complex designed for stargazing rather than parking. You lean against one of those peculiar inverted columns again, remembering their distinctive shape. Narrow at the base, wider at the top. It's such a simple, elegant inversion that even now, engineers nod in appreciation. The design wasn't just aesthetic, it improved stability during earthquakes, allowing the columns to absorb tremors rather than fight them. It's like the entire palace was built to sway gently with the island's heartbeat instead of resisting it. And then you notice something else, how open everything feels, but also how private it can become. Corridors curve in ways that obscure direct views. Staircases turn unexpectedly. Light filters down through openings that seem carved with intention. The architecture seems to guide your mood, encouraging calm, curiosity, or contemplation depending on where you stand. You could get lost here, but you wouldn't mind. Getting lost seems to be part of the design. There's a faint dripping sound, water trickling through a hidden channel somewhere below. The Minoans, clever as ever, mastered the movement of water through their architecture. Aqueducts carried fresh water into the palace. Drains whisked away waste. You can almost hear the soft gurgle under your feet, the ancient plumbing still whispering after thousands of years. For a Bronze Age civilization, that's impressive, especially considering that some medieval European castles still lacked indoor plumbing 3,000 years later. You find yourself smiling at that. The Minoans were ahead of their time in ways that feel almost domestic, almost cozy. They weren't carving mountains into tombs or building monuments to death. They were building comfort, community, and beauty into daily life. Theirs was an architecture of living, not dying. As the light changes, you step into a room that must once have been a gathering place. The air is cooler here, trapped between thick walls that insulate against the island's heat. The floor, paved with gypsum slabs, glows faintly like moonlight. A low bench runs along one wall, maybe for conversation or quiet rest. The room feels serene, intimate. You picture people sitting here thousands of years ago, talking about trade, harvests, or maybe just the weather. You half expect someone to offer you wine.
There's a strange comfort in imagining this ancient normalcy. It's easy to think of history as grand and distant, emperors, battles, gods. But here, among the quiet stones of Knossos, you sense something familiar, the simple human desire to create a space that feels like home. A gentle breeze slips in through an open doorway. Outside, bees hum lazily around potted herbs, thyme, oregano, maybe saffron. The scent drifts inward, blending with the cool mineral smell of stone. You take a slow breath. Even in silence, the place hums with life.
Somewhere nearby, a tour guide's voice echoes faintly, modern, accented, reverent. You catch a phrase about the oldest paved road in Europe, and you realize she's right. A stretch of that ancient road still winds from the harbor to Knossos, its paving stones smoothed by centuries of trade and footsteps. You smile again. The Minoans didn't just build for themselves, they built for continuity, for connection. Historians still argue whether their architectural openness came from confidence in peace or simply an absence of external threats. Whatever the reason, the result feels almost utopian, an ancient city without walls, trusting the sea and its own balance to keep harmony. You move on, down another sloping corridor where light wells cast shifting shadows. The air cools again, and your footsteps echo softly. The walls here are plastered smooth, the color faded to pale cream. You touch the surface. It's cool and slightly rough, the texture of ancient lime mixed with crushed seashells. For a moment, you stop and just listen to the sound of your breath, the faint trickle of water, and somewhere beyond, the endless whisper of the Aegean. The entire structure feels alive, as if it still remembers what it was to be full of laughter, footsteps, and music. And maybe it does. Places hold memory in ways we can't measure, etched not in stone, but in air, in the way light falls through a window, in the echo that lingers when you leave. The Palace of Knossos, this palace without walls, still carries that quiet pulse, a hum beneath time's dust. As you step back into the sunlight, the courtyard glows golden. You feel the warmth of the flagstones through your sandals, and somewhere overhead, a bird calls across the valley. You stand there for a long moment, eyes half closed, just letting the light and wind pass over you. The Minoans may have lived 4,000 years ago, but their architecture still whispers something modern, something gentle about coexistence, balance, and beauty that doesn't need to prove itself. It's not loud, it's not perfect, but it feels right. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it timeless. You wander deeper into the palace complex, where the air smells faintly of dust and sun-warmed plaster. The walls around you begin to glow, not from the sun directly, but from color. Everywhere you look, fragments of paintings cling stubbornly to stone. Curls of blue, flashes of red, faded traces of gold. The Minoans, it seems, couldn't bear a blank wall. Even the spaces between doorways once shimmered with painted life. You pause beside one of those frescoed panels, running your fingers a few centimeters above its rough surface. The pigment, made from natural minerals, has survived thousands of years of wind, earthquakes, and the occasional over-eager archaeologist's brush. You can still make out the outline of a leaping dolphin, its back arched in a motion that feels somehow musical. You can almost hear water splash around it. The Minoans loved color the way the sea loves reflection. Their architecture and art weren't separate. Every column, every wall, every pot seemed to hum with pigment. Bright reds made from iron oxide, deep blues from azurite, yellows from ochre, and whites from crushed shells. Even ceilings were once painted in geometric patterns, so that when you looked up, you didn't see emptiness, you saw rhythm. You move through a corridor where light filters in through an open shaft, and for a moment, you understand what they were doing. The Minoans didn't use color to decorate, they used it to shape experience. The blue walls near water basins deepened the illusion of coolness. Warm reds and golds near hearths made rooms feel brighter in winter. It's what modern designers might call environmental psychology, except the Minoans figured it out 3.5 millennia early without a single PowerPoint presentation. Somewhere ahead, a patch of sunlight catches on pottery shards left in a corner. You crouch to look. Even the broken pieces are beautiful. Curved lines of paint, bits of spirals, traces of flowers. The Minoans painted octopuses that curled around the sides of their jars as if the vessels themselves were alive. Historians still argue whether the artists worked freehand or used some sort of guide, but either way, the fluidity feels astonishingly modern. It's art without stiffness, like someone who never learned that ancient people were supposed to be serious. You imagine one of those potters sitting at a wheel, the clay spinning under practiced hands. Maybe he hums to himself, maybe his child watches nearby, maybe he's just thinking about dinner. The air smells of wet earth and ash. When the shape feels right, he lifts the pot, sets it aside to dry, and later paints it with sea creatures or floating lilies. There's a casual perfection to the work, nothing rushed, nothing over-designed. A gust of wind drifts through the passage, carrying a faint tang of salt. The sea is never far away here. The same trade winds that brought ships from Egypt and Cyprus also carried colors, ideas, and materials. Cretan merchants returned with cinnabar for richer reds, lapis for deeper blues, and ivory for fine detail work. Their architecture absorbed those influences like sunlight, transforming them into something distinctly Minoan. You find yourself in a long hall where the walls once blazed with a famous image, the Prince of the Lilies, or maybe the Priest King, depending on which scholar you believe. What survives is fragmented, a torso here, a plume of feathers there. Archaeologists pieced the image together more from intuition than evidence, and historians still debate whether it's one figure or several. Either way, the movement feels alive, shoulders leaning forward, the body twisting slightly, as if caught mid-step. And that's part of what made Minoan art so different. It moved. Figures bent, danced, and stretched with natural ease. Most other Bronze Age art looked stiff, ceremonial. Minoan figures laughed, leapt, and sometimes, if you believe one particularly mischievous fresco, wore nothing but jewelry and confidence. You can almost hear a chuckle from some ancient artist whispering, "What? It's warm here." One fresco shows a group of people gathering saffron. They bend gently, plucking threads from purple crocus flowers, placing them in baskets. The background glows with yellow light, the air thick with imagined fragrance. This was likely part of a larger mural in Akrotiri, another Minoan-influenced site on Santorini, preserved by volcanic ash. Even though that eruption destroyed so much, it accidentally created a time capsule of color. Every wall in those buried houses still breathes with pigment, as if the paint never fully dried. You reach an open courtyard again, the light almost blinding after the shadowed halls. On one side stands a storage building, rows of large pithae, those massive clay jars that once held olive oil, grain, or wine. Their surfaces are covered in spirals and waves, as if the artists couldn't resist turning even storage containers into sculpture.
You run your hand across one rim. It's cool, heavy, solid, and yet graceful in proportion. The Minoans didn't seem to draw strict lines between art and architecture, between function and beauty. A wall could be a painting. A jar could be both vessel and symbol. Even staircases had pattern and rhythm. You realize, standing there, that this integration of art and structure is what makes Knossos feel so alive. It's not just preserved stone, it's personality fossilized. Somewhere, faintly, you can hear the call of a modern guide again, mentioning how Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who first excavated Knossos, restored much of what you're seeing. His idea of restoration, however, leaned heavily on imagination. Many of these colors and designs were repainted under his direction. Historians still argue whether he captured the truth or just a dream of it. You decide it's probably both. After all, every civilization is partly what it built and partly what later generations believed about it. You turn down another corridor and notice a ceiling beam streaked with pigment. The light from a nearby shaft hits it just right, revealing faint geometric motifs, chevrons, spirals, and dots. These weren't random doodles. Minoan decoration followed rhythm and proportion, the way music follows melody. Even in their architecture, you sense choreography. Each visual element seems to echo the movement of life around it. A soft laugh escapes you. Somewhere in this palace, someone 4,000 years ago probably stood exactly where you are, thinking about how to make this place feel just a little more beautiful. Maybe they argued with a colleague about which shade of blue to use, or whether that dolphin should leap left or right. Artistic debates, another thing that hasn't changed much over the millennia. As the day tilts toward evening, the colors on the walls shift. The reds deepen, the blues soften into gray. You realize that Minoan art wasn't meant to be static. It changed with the light. The whole palace must have transformed hour by hour, glowing gold at dawn, turning tranquil and shadow-cooled by dusk. The builders had a relationship with light that most modern designers would envy. And here's a small, delightful detail. Archaeologists found traces of a vivid blue pigment not only on palace walls, but also in everyday homes. Even modest houses in the Minoan world had frescoes, simple scenes of gardens, birds, or geometric bands. Beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a default setting. The breeze carries a faint rustle from outside, the olive trees whispering against one another. You stand there for a moment, letting the sound merge with the visual memory of color. You imagine the palace in its prime, floors gleaming with plaster polish, walls alive with art, doorways bright with sunlight. The air would have shimmered with energy and scent and conversation. And yet, for all its beauty, it never feels ostentatious. The Minoans didn't seem to crave monumentality. Their color wasn't a declaration of power. It was an invitation to feel at ease. Even the king, if there was one, lived amid dolphins and lilies, not armies and thunderbolts. Maybe that's why this place feels peaceful even in ruin. You take one last slow look at the fresco before you leave the hall. The dolphin's leap seems eternal now, suspended mid-air between sea and sky. Its motion, frozen yet alive, feels like the perfect metaphor for Minoan art, and maybe for all of history itself. Movement caught in stillness, beauty that survives by accident, whispers that refuse to fade. The sun has dropped lower now, filling the palace with amber light. The shadows lengthen and the colors begin to dim. You turn toward the next corridor, where the air smells faintly of wood and earth. Ahead lies another mystery, another layer of Minoan life waiting beneath the dust. You take a slow step forward. Because here, every wall still wants to tell a story. You just have to listen quietly enough to hear it. You step out into the open air again, where the wind slips through the olive trees and brushes your skin like the hand of someone who's lived here forever. The light on Crete has changed. It's softer now, almost honey-colored, and the walls of Knossos seem to glow from within. You look around and notice how everything feels both sturdy and delicate, like something that understands its own impermanence. The stones beneath your feet are pale, almost white, flecked with gray and pink. Local gypsum, mostly, cut from nearby quarries. It's soft enough to carve, yet strong enough to hold the weight of centuries. The Minoans chose it not for grandeur, but for warmth. When the sun hits the palace walls at midday, the gypsum doesn't burn your hand. It radiates a steady, calm heat. Even their choice of material seems kind. You pause at a corner where the plaster is peeled back, revealing layers of construction: stone, timber, plaster, paint. The Minoans built in rhythm with the island's resources: limestone from the hills, wood from cypress groves, clay from the riverbeds, and the sea's breath in every open space. You can almost hear the builders discussing it. Let the wind in, but keep the rain out. Simple, practical, poetic. Modern architects might call it bioclimatic design. The Minoans would probably just call it common sense. You walk along a low terrace lined with wooden beams. Well, they would have been wood once. Now they're stone reconstructions, painted to suggest what used to be. Back then, those beams helped absorb shock from the frequent earthquakes. It's one of the quiet miracles of Minoan engineering. They built their world to bend, not break. Historians still argue whether this flexible timber and stone system was intentional earthquake resistance or simply good craftsmanship. Either way, it worked. The palace survived tremors that would have leveled less forgiving structures. You rest your hand against one of the painted columns. The texture is rough, the color deep ochre fading to orange. The column tapers upward, narrow at the base, wide at the top. The inversion still feels almost mischievous, like the architects were showing off. But it's more than style. It helps distribute weight more efficiently. You think about how every civilization finds its own way to cheat gravity, and how the Minoans did it with such quiet confidence. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint creak of wood, a reconstruction beam shifting in the afternoon breeze. You picture the original palace alive with that same sound, the soft conversation of timber and stone. Roof beams would have stretched across open courtyards, supporting clay-coated ceilings. When the wind moved through, the entire structure must have sighed. Imagine falling asleep to that, a gentle, ancient lullaby built by your own house. A bird lands on a wall nearby, a quick flash of color against faded plaster. You follow its gaze to a doorway framed in dark stone. Above it, faint carvings remain, spirals perhaps, or waves. The Minoans use these motifs everywhere, on pottery, in frescoes, even etched into thresholds. They weren't just decoration, they were language. The spiral meant continuity, water, motion, ideas essential to island life. If you listen closely, you can almost feel the pattern under your feet, repeating like a tide. You step through the doorway into a long, narrow corridor. The walls close in slightly, but the ceiling stays open to light and air. The floor slopes just enough to drain water, a small detail, but an important one. The Minoans didn't waste effort fighting their environment. They worked with it. Rainwater flowed where it needed to. Sunlight fell exactly where it should. In this corridor, the light shifts like water, dappling from pale gold to cool gray as clouds pass overhead. An ancient mason standing here, smoothing plaster with a curved trowel, whistling softly. The air smells of lime and sea salt. He knows these walls will last longer than he will, but that doesn't bother him. To the Minoans, permanence wasn't the point. Harmony was. You exit the corridor into another courtyard, smaller than the first. This one feels almost domestic.
A shallow basin sits at the center, perhaps once a cistern, perhaps a small garden. The Minoans loved to blur boundaries between indoors and outdoors. Their homes had open courtyards like this one, where light and air moved freely. It's a philosophy that modern architecture rediscovers every few decades as if it were new. The wind picks up again, carrying the smell of rosemary from the hills. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine life here. A family sitting in the courtyard, children playing, someone grinding grain on a flat stone. The house walls are low, plastered in soft pinks and creams. Inside, beams of cypress wood cross the ceilings. Light wells funnel brightness down through the rooms, turning even storage spaces into glowing caverns. You open your eyes and smile. You could live here. The architecture isn't alien or monumental, it's human. You could imagine yourself eating figs in the shade of a column, or listening to rain drip through terracotta drains. A fun, slightly odd fact: archaeologists found that Minoan builders sometimes mixed straw or animal hair into their plaster for flexibility. It sounds strange, but it helped prevent cracking during tremors. So yes, the same palace that gleamed with dolphins and lilies also had a dash of goat hair in the walls. Bronze Age eco-engineering. The air grows cooler as clouds drift over the sun. You wander toward the palace's outer edges, where workshops once buzzed with noise. The buildings here are simpler: unpainted stone, wooden supports, open roofs for ventilation. You can almost hear the clatter of bronze tools and the low murmur of craftsmen at work. Each workshop is laid out logically, with easy access to storage and light. Even industrial spaces were designed with thoughtfulness. The Minoans didn't seem to draw a line between beauty and utility. You pause beside a small window cut into a wall at an angle. It doesn't look like much, just a narrow slit. But when you stand in front of it, you feel the breeze pass through at full strength. A natural air vent, perfectly positioned to catch the prevailing wind. These subtle touches make you realize how intimately the builders knew their landscape. They weren't imposing architecture onto nature, they were collaborating with it. You step outside again, and the sea is there in the distance, shimmering like molten glass. The palace seems to align with it. Doorways opening toward the coast, terraces facing the horizon. Historians still argue whether that alignment was symbolic, ritualistic, or simply practical for navigation. Either way, it ties the architecture to the sea, as if every room yearned for the sound of waves. You find a stone bench under a fig tree and sit for a moment. The leaves above you flicker in the wind, casting moving shadows over the ground. You realize that everything here, every surface, every opening, was built to play with light. The Minoans didn't just endure their climate, they celebrated it. In the shifting sun, the palace feels alive, changing mood by the hour. As twilight begins to touch the horizon, the colors of the stone deepen. The gypsum glows amber. The shadows stretch long and soft. You run your hand along the wall one last time. The stone feels warm, but beneath it, the timber and clay hold the day's memory, cooling slowly. It's a living structure, one that breathes, flexes, and sighs with the island itself. You stand and take a final look back at Knossos. From here, it doesn't look like a ruin. It looks like a landscape, stone and sky woven together. You imagine the builders watching the same sunset, satisfied that their work didn't just stand against the elements, but danced with them. And you can't help but think, maybe that's what architecture was meant to be before ambition got loud. Just a way of listening to the earth and answering softly. You wander deeper into the palace grounds, and the air begins to shift again. It's cooler here, shaded by high walls that seem to hold on to whispers. Somewhere above you, a dove coos lazily, and its echo rolls down the corridors like a sigh. You're moving toward what used to be the heart of domestic life, the living quarters and private chambers of the Minoans. The hum of the ancient world gets quieter here, more intimate. You can almost feel the rhythm of footsteps that once crossed these thresholds, bare feet on polished stone.
The light filters through narrow shafts, soft and indirect, landing in pools that shimmer on the floor. Even in the Bronze Age, the Minoans understood the power of light, how it could guide your attention, soothe the eye, and make a space feel alive. You pause, watching dust dance in one of those golden beams. It's hypnotic. You realize this isn't just architecture, it's choreography.
The Minoan home was different from what you might expect of an ancient palace. There's no single throne room towering over the rest, no massive chamber of power meant to intimidate. Instead, these spaces feel human. You can tell they were designed for comfort, for daily life. Some rooms were small and cozy. Others opened into private courtyards where the sunlight fell freely. Historians still argue whether the Minoans even had kings in the traditional sense, if palace is even the right word. Maybe it was more like a complex of homes, workshops, and shrines all woven together. You step into what was once a living chamber. The walls are faintly tinted with red pigment, the floor smoothed from years of wear. A stone platform sits along one wall, perhaps a bed base, though calling it a bed feels too modern. You imagine woven mats laid across it, soft linen blankets, maybe even stuffed cushions made from reeds or wool. The air would have smelled faintly of olive oil and smoke from small lamps. It's oddly comforting to think that 3,500 years ago, someone lay here, maybe staring at the same ceiling, also trying to fall asleep.
A quiet chuckle escapes you. You probably won't survive this, you think. The Minoan mattress market. No springs, no memory foam, just reeds, fabric, and gravity. But maybe that's enough. After all, they didn't seem to lose much sleep over it. Across from the platform is a low niche in the wall, possibly for storage or offerings. The Minoans didn't separate the sacred from the ordinary the way we do. Every household might have had a small shrine, a place for daily rituals, for pouring a few drops of wine, or burning herbs for the household goddess. It's easy to imagine flickers of lamplight on those plaster walls, shadows dancing across the faint red pigment. In one corner, there's a strange little stone channel. It looks too deliberate to be random. Archaeologists think it might have been part of a primitive plumbing system. And indeed, the Minoans were famous for their indoor plumbing long before the Romans showed up to take credit. They built clay pipes beneath floors, used gravity to flush water, and even had bathtubs. Yes, actual bathtubs in some of their private rooms. There's one particularly well-preserved example, a reddish-brown clay tub shaped like a half-egg, just deep enough to soak in. Imagine that, a Bronze Age bubble bath, minus the bubbles. The plumbing was more advanced than you'd expect from a civilization so ancient. They had separate channels for clean water and drainage, all sloping gently to move liquid naturally. The system worked so well that remnants of it were still functional when first excavated. It's one of those moments when history humbles you. You realize that while we think of modern technology as revolutionary, much of it is just rediscovery. As you explore, a faint breeze follows you through the corridors, as if guided by design. The Minoans seem to understand how to control airflow. They placed windows opposite doorways to create natural cross-ventilation. When the heat rose, the air moved effortlessly through their homes, cooling them without a single fan or whisper of electricity. There's something strangely emotional about that. The idea that comfort was built right into the bones of their world, not through power, but through observation, through paying attention to wind, light, and stone. You realize that for them, architecture wasn't about conquering nature. It was about living in quiet partnership with it.
A small, almost hidden staircase appears to your left. Its steps are uneven, carved from stone that's been worn smooth over millennia. You take them slowly, your hand brushing the wall for balance. The stairwell curves tightly, leading up to what feels like a more private level. The light here is dim, but ahead there's a glow, a shaft of sunlight spilling from an opening above. When you reach the top, the air changes. It's lighter, fragrant with the faint memory of herbs, thyme maybe, or bay leaves that once hung to dry. This upper space is quieter still. Some archaeologists think these upper floors were women's quarters, or perhaps rooms for weaving, resting, or prayer. On one wall, fragments of a fresco remain, a swirl of blue and white, maybe once part of a dolphin or sea wave. The Minoans loved to paint the world they knew, the ocean, lilies, birds, dancing figures. Their art feels alive, almost casual. You can tell it was made by people who found beauty in movement, in the ordinary gestures of living. There's one quirky little detail you can't help but smile at. Some Minoan frescoes show monkeys. Yes, monkeys swinging through stylized trees. But monkeys didn't live on Crete, so how did the artists know what they looked like? Probably trade, maybe even imported pets, though historians still argue whether these monkeys were local symbols or exotic imports. Either way, you like the idea of someone 3,500 years ago deciding their home decor could use a few tasteful monkeys. You lean against a window frame, looking out over what used to be the palace's residential wing. From here, the sea shimmers faintly in the distance. You can almost picture evening settling in, the walls glowing amber in torchlight, the sound of laughter echoing from below. It's easy to forget that this place wasn't built as a fortress. It had no walls. The Minoans didn't fortify their cities. Perhaps they felt safe on their island, or maybe their fleet was protection enough. Historians still debate that point too, but the result is that their homes were open, airy, unafraid. You imagine night falling, oil lamps flickering in niches, shadows swaying across painted walls. Someone closes a wooden shutter against the wind. Another opens a jar of olive oil, the scent rich and sharp. Somewhere, a dog curls up near a threshold. You listen, but there's no war, no shouts, no clang of weapons, just the soft hush of domestic life, steady as breathing. These rooms were never designed to impress strangers. They were designed to cradle their inhabitants, to make every corner usable, breathable, human. You run your hand over the smooth plaster and feel the faint warmth from the day still stored inside. Maybe that's what home really meant to them, a space that remembers your presence, even when you're gone. And as you step back into the corridor, the sea breeze catches you again. It winds through the rooms like a memory, whispering against the walls that still stand. The light softens, turning the air gold. You feel as though the architecture itself is exhaling, content, unhurried, still doing exactly what it was built to do, make the world a little gentler for the people who live in it. You follow the corridor downhill, your footsteps echoing softly off stone that's seen thousands of footsteps before yours. The air grows cooler, denser, and there's a faint trickle somewhere ahead, the sound of water moving underground. You're entering one of the most astonishing and frankly underrated parts of Minoan architecture, their water systems. Not temples, not frescoes, not fancy columns, just water, quietly managed with Bronze Age precision. The Minoans were, in many ways, the plumbers of the ancient world. Long before Rome built aqueducts, Crete had channels, drains, and even terracotta pipes connecting private bathrooms to the larger palace network. You pause beside a stone trough where runoff would have collected during heavy rains. The edges are smooth, shaped by time and, likely, the occasional worker who leaned there to test the flow. You crouch down and run your fingers along the groove where water once slid through, carrying dust, leaves, and echoes of ancient conversations. The Minoans didn't just store water, they directed it, celebrated it, almost treated it like a guest.
Their architecture reveals how much they valued cleanliness and balance. Some scholars argue that ritual bathing was part of their daily life, not only for hygiene, but also for spiritual renewal. The Minoans might not have had words for self-care, but they were definitely doing it first. You step deeper into the system, following a small stone stairway that leads into what looks like an open courtyard. At first, it seems ordinary, but then you notice the gentle slope of the floor, designed for drainage. Rainwater would have trickled from rooftops, across courtyards, and into channels like veins in a living organism. The palace at Knossos wasn't static. It breathed, exhaled, and recycled. It's here that you find one of the most famous features of Minoan design, the clay pipes. They're laid neatly, one inside the other, fitted so perfectly that modern engineers have called them shockingly precise. You smile, imagining some Minoan craftsperson tapping a pipe into place, probably muttering the Bronze Age equivalent of perfect fit. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Archaeologists discovered that some of these pipes were installed with an intentional curvature, maybe to handle water pressure or avoid cracking during tremors. Historians still argue whether that curve was structural genius or just artistic flair. Either way, it worked. You lean close to one of the ancient conduits. Its reddish clay still holds traces of mineral buildup, like the inside of an old kettle. And though there's no water now, you swear you can almost hear the ghost of it rushing through. Steady, rhythmic, comforting. Following the sound of imagined water, you move toward another chamber. The walls here are smoother, polished by years of damp air. In the center stands a small basin, carved directly into the floor. It's not grand, barely knee-high, but you can sense the importance of it. This was likely part of a purification room, where visitors might have cleansed themselves before entering sacred spaces. There's something quietly reverent about the design. No excess, no showmanship, just a practical space made beautiful by proportion and light. When you tilt your head up, you notice narrow shafts in the ceiling that would have allowed sunlight and rain to fall directly into the basin. Imagine it. You step inside, wash your hands or face, and above you, a column of golden water descends from the sky. It's architecture that turns necessity into poetry. You sit on a low ledge beside the basin and let your imagination wander. Maybe a priestess once stood here, cupping cool water in her hands, whispering a small prayer to a household goddess. Maybe children splashed their faces before meals, laughing while someone scolded them gently. Maybe, just maybe, someone once sat exactly where you are, feeling the same cool stone and thinking, "This place works." It's strange how technology and tranquility coexist so naturally here. You realize that Minoan architecture wasn't obsessed with innovation for its own sake, it sought harmony. Their water systems weren't hidden behind walls, they were integrated into daily life, visible, part of the rhythm of living. As you stand, your eyes catch another feature, a tall, narrow shaft leading downward, lined with smooth plaster. It's an ancient light well, doubling as a ventilation system. The Minoans used these throughout their palaces, capturing sunlight and airflow even in underground chambers. When you peer into it, you feel a faint draft against your face. The air is cool and fresh, even here, buried deep in stone. You think about how modern architects design smart homes with climate control, airflow systems, and natural light optimization. The Minoans did all of that, with clay and intuition. No electricity, no sensors, just centuries of observation. The ground beneath your feet trembles slightly, not a real earthquake, just the island's breeze teasing the stones. Still, it reminds you, the Minoans built with earthquakes in mind. Those flexible wooden beams between stone blocks weren't just aesthetic, they were survival mechanisms. Some reconstructions even show that the plumbing lines were built with joints to absorb tremors. You can't help but grin. Bronze Age architects, 1. Seismic instability, 0.
As you make your way upward again, the air warms and sunlight floods back into view. You emerge into an open court bordered by slender columns, their paint faded but still vivid enough to hint at past glory. Red shafts, black capitals, creamy white bands. The Minoans loved contrast, not loud, but subtle, balanced, like everything else they did. In the corner, you notice a decorative spout shaped like an animal's head, a bull perhaps. Its hollow mouth once poured rainwater from the roof during storms. You imagine the spectacle, water cascading in sheets, splashing into stone basins, then vanishing through the floor to rejoin the underground system. Even their drainage was theatrical. You crouch beside the basin and trace the faint carvings on its rim. The bull's head wasn't random, it was sacred. The bull symbol appeared everywhere in Minoan culture, linked to strength, fertility, and ritual. Some believe these decorative water features carried spiritual meaning, cleansing both the physical and the divine. Historians still debate whether such spaces were purely practical or ceremonial. You suspect the Minoans, answer both. A shadow moves across the ground, and you glance up to see a cloud drifting past the sun. The light dims for a heartbeat, then returns, soft and golden. You realize how alive this architecture must have felt when it was new. The water trickling, light shifting, air flowing. It wasn't static. It was dynamic, alive, in conversation with its surroundings. And as you stand there, surrounded by ancient stones and imagined streams, you feel an odd sense of calm. You can't hear the water anymore, but you know it's still there, somewhere beneath the ground, winding its way through channels carved by hands long gone. You start to walk again, but slower this time, letting each step echo softly against the stone. The Minoans built for comfort, for function, for balance, but most of all, for continuity. Their architecture wasn't just about surviving nature, it was about belonging to it. You catch yourself smiling. If you ever build a house, you think, you'll remember to let the wind in, leave room for light, and always, always respect the path of water. You move toward the outer edges of the palace again, and this time the soundscape changes. The murmuring quiet of the water systems fades, replaced by a light buzz of imagined activity, the rhythmic thump of mallets, the scrape of bronze tools, the soft call of voices carried on the wind. You're entering what once would have been the workshops and storerooms of Knossos, the arteries that kept this great organism alive. It's easy to forget that palaces like this weren't just royal residences. They were bustling administrative centers, the economic heartbeat of Minoan society. Picture it, clay dust swirling in the air, the sharp scent of olive oil, the crackle of a kiln firing pottery just beyond the courtyard. You can almost taste the smoke. You stop beside a long, narrow room with rows of low stone platforms. It doesn't look like much, just another empty ruin. But this is where storage jars, or pithoi, once stood. They were massive, some as tall as you are, and heavy enough to require 2 people to move even when empty. These jars held everything from grain and olives to honey and wine, the staples of Minoan life. You imagine how, during harvest season, this entire room would have been filled with the earthy sweetness of barley and oil, the air thick with the smell of beeswax-sealed lids. A soft chuckle escapes you as you picture the ancient equivalent of inventory management. Somewhere, a scribe probably stood by with a stylus and clay tablet recording every jar. And speaking of those tablets, yes, the Minoans had their own written language called Linear A. It's still not fully deciphered. Historians argue endlessly about what it says, lists of goods, rituals, taxes, but nobody can read it fluently yet. The language remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Bronze Age. It's humbling, really. thousands of years later, we can map the stars and edit genes, but we still can't read Minoan grocery lists. You pass through a low doorway and step into another chamber. Here, the floor dips slightly in the middle, and a shallow channel runs along one wall. It might have been a workshop for dyeing fabrics or processing oils. The Minoans were masters of craft: pottery, textiles, metalwork. Their artisans worked in small, well-lit spaces like this, often near courtyards where natural light poured in. They designed their work areas with the same care as their living spaces, knowing that light, air, and order could make labor more bearable. You run your fingers over the wall, feeling faint indentations where shelves once hung. You can almost see the tools: bronze knives, chisels, wooden molds, brushes made from animal hair. Somewhere nearby, a potter's wheel turns, a slow, steady rhythm that feels almost meditative. A quirky detail pops into your mind. Archaeologists have found small lumps of colored pigment, reds, blues, and yellows, still stored in ancient bowls. The pigments were made from minerals and even sea creatures. Minoan painters used crushed lapis, ochre, and, in some cases, powdered shells to make their famous fresco colors. Imagine grinding seashells for art. It's both bizarre and poetic. You step into another, larger courtyard where the light falls full and warm. Here, the floor bears circular impressions where those Pythai once rested. A low stone bench runs along one wall, and behind it, narrow stairways lead up to upper rooms. It's easy to see how interconnected everything was. Workshops above, storage below, open spaces for airflow and movement. There's an easy rhythm to the layout, a sense of logic that modern architects might envy. You pause and lean against the wall, imagining the workers bustling around. You can almost hear them laughing, treating gossip about the day, maybe even humming while they work. Not everything in ancient life was solemn or ceremonial. Most of it was just living. As you walk, you notice faint traces of blackened stone near one corner, evidence of a hearth. You kneel beside it, brushing your hand over the surface. It's smoother here, slightly glazed from heat. The Minoans cooked and worked in spaces like this, often side by side. It's tempting to imagine some of the workers grabbing lunch right where they worked: flatbread, olives, maybe dried figs. You can almost smell it, the warm, nutty scent of barley bread baking on stone. And then your mind drifts to the farmers who made it possible, the ones outside the palace walls, tending olive groves and vineyards on the terraced hillsides. Their harvests filled these storerooms. Their work kept the palace alive. Yet their homes were built from the same materials, designed with the same attention to comfort and air. The Minoans, it seems, didn't reserve beauty only for the elite. Their architectural principles filtered down through every layer of life. You step toward the far edge of the complex, where the palace meets open ground. The floor beneath you changes. Stone gives way to packed earth. Ahead, there's a long, low platform with small depressions carved into its surface. Archaeologists believe it might have been used for pressing olives or grapes. You can almost hear the squelch of fruit underfoot, the laughter of people turning labor into ritual. A soft breeze blows across the open space, carrying with it a hint of salt from the nearby sea. You close your eyes for a moment. The air smells faintly metallic, almost like old tools and wet stone. You can sense the rhythm of daily life that once pulsed through this place, the steady heartbeat of an island civilization that never forgot how to breathe. The Minoans didn't build their cities around walls or battlefields. They built them around production, art, and community. Their architecture mirrored their values: open, functional, alive. Historians still debate whether that openness was a sign of peace or simply geography, but you like to think it was confidence, a belief that their world was stable enough not to need fortresses. As you move back through the corridors, the light shifts again. Evening is settling, and the palace begins to glow with the kind of golden calm that feels almost sacred. You pause beside a small window slit, looking out toward the horizon. Beyond the hills, the Aegean Sea is a sheet of silver. You imagine ships returning to harbor, sails lowering, men carrying amphorae filled with oil or wine, goods that would soon pass through these very storerooms. The system worked like clockwork, sustained by trade routes that stretched across the Mediterranean. A smile tugs at your lips. The world's first supply chain, you murmur softly. Somewhere in that line of exchange between the farmers, the merchants, and the palace scribes lies the seed of civilization as we know it. And here you stand in the echo of its architecture. Before you leave the courtyard, you glance one more time at the rows of storage pits and imagine them filled again, brimming with abundance. There's something quietly optimistic about it. Even after centuries of earthquakes, decay, and silence, this place still feels full of air, of light, of potential. You step out into the open once more, where the evening air is cool and the horizon burns faintly orange. The Minoans might not have left us their words, but they left us something better, a blueprint for living with grace, function, and peace. You walk slowly, the sound of your footsteps fading into the wind, and the thought lingers. How incredible that the heart of their civilization was not a fortress, but a storeroom. You wander toward the upper terraces, where light filters through half-collapsed doorways and paints everything in soft gold. The air here feels lighter, touched by the sea that glimmers somewhere beyond the hills. You can almost taste the salt in every breath. This is where the Minoans built their world of quiet grandeur, where the rulers, or perhaps just caretakers, lived above the bustle of storerooms and courtyards. You imagine yourself padding softly across the smooth flagstones, sandals whispering, as if even your footsteps are reluctant to disturb the silence. The architecture around you begins to change. Down below, the corridors were wide and echoing, designed for movement and trade. But here, things grow intimate. Narrow passageways branch into cozy chambers, lit by slanting shafts of sunlight that slip through open windows. Each room feels deliberate, a balance of geometry and grace. You pause before a doorway framed with dark red borders. The color has faded with centuries, but you can still sense the intention behind it. These weren't random decorations. The Minoans loved to use color to define spaces, not just for beauty, but to create mood. Deep reds for warmth, blues for tranquility, white plaster for clarity. They built not just to shelter the body, but to soothe the mind. You pass into what might once have been a sitting room, or perhaps a private shrine. Archaeologists can't quite agree. Historians still argue whether these upper chambers were the living quarters of royalty or sacred areas devoted to rituals of renewal. Either way, there's something deeply peaceful about them. You can almost picture a figure kneeling near the wall, head bowed, maybe whispering a quiet prayer to the goddess of the sea or the mountains. The Minoans, after all, seem to worship balance itself, between earth and sky, male and female, chaos and order. You find a low ledge along one wall, a bench built directly into the structure, its surface cool and polished. You sit, letting your hand rest against the stone. It's faintly warm from the sun that drifts through the high window. And in this moment, you realize something oddly comforting. These rooms weren't built for defense. They weren't fortresses. Unlike their later Greek or Mycenaean neighbors, the Minoans didn't build massive walls to protect themselves from attack. They built open palaces, full of air and light. It's as if they trusted the world around them, or perhaps they simply trusted their place within it. That's one of those historical quirks scholars can't stop discussing. Why did the Minoans leave themselves so exposed? Historians still argue whether their lack of fortifications meant they ruled the seas so confidently that no one dared invade, or whether their island isolation simply made them feel safe. Maybe they believed beauty itself could be a kind of protection, a harmony so complete that violence had no place in it. You tilt your head back and imagine what this terrace looked like when it was alive. Women in flowing linen robes passing between doorways, children chasing each other through the sunbeams, priests or priestesses carrying small bowls of fragrant oil for a ritual that marked the changing of the seasons. There's a stillness in these upper levels that almost feels intentional. You notice the way the walls line up with the light. The Minoans seem to understand how to choreograph illumination, how to let sunrise or sunset guide the rhythm of their days. The upper terrace catches morning light, while the central court below gathers the midday blaze. It's as if the palace itself functioned as a living calendar, quietly measuring time in shifting shadows. You step closer to a window opening and look out. Below, the lower courtyards stretch out like a map. Clusters of columns, staircases curling into hidden corners, the faint memory of laughter and trade. Beyond that, fields spread in patchwork tones of gold and green. Olive trees sway, and somewhere in the distance you can almost hear the faint tinkling of goat bells. The Minoans lived close to their land, but they also seemed to elevate themselves just above it, not in arrogance, but in awareness. From here, you could see both the harvest and the horizon. It must have been a place to think. Inside again, the walls hold secrets of comfort you didn't expect from such an ancient world. The rooms are positioned to catch breezes in summer and to hold warmth in winter. The ceilings, once covered in painted patterns, might have shimmered in torchlight. You run your fingers along a section of plaster and realize it still holds a faint, chalky scent of lime. The architecture was not only functional, it was sensory. Every element was meant to touch life in some quiet, practical way. A small stairway curls up to what remains of the roof level. You follow it carefully, your steps light, the stone cool underfoot. When you reach the top, the sea stretches before you, wide and blue, as it has for millennia. The wind here is stronger, carrying hints of thyme and salt. You close your eyes and let the sound fill you. The rhythmic pulse of waves meeting rock, the sigh of wind through ruins. You can imagine why the Minoans placed their palaces high. From here, the island feels like a living creature, breathing beneath you. Some scholars believe these upper terraces also served ceremonial roles, open platforms for offerings perhaps, or places to greet the dawn. Historians still argue whether the Minoans practiced organized religion as we understand it, or something more fluid, a reverence woven into everyday life. Maybe it didn't need temples or priests, just moments like this, a soft wind, a view of the sea, the hum of existence quietly acknowledged. You lean on the low wall and think about how different this ancient architecture feels from most that followed. Later empires built to display power. The Minoans aimed to display peace. Their walls invited light, their thresholds framed the natural world, and even their most luxurious chambers whispered rather than shouted. The upper terrace you stand on now embodies that philosophy perfectly. Spacious but not imposing, designed for the comfort of living rather than the command of it. And then, one of those little curiosities historians love to debate, the so-called Queen's Megaron. You pass a fragment of it nearby, dolphin frescoes leaping across blue plaster, their arcs playful and free. It's one of the most famous Minoan artworks ever found, and it makes you smile. You can't help but imagine someone decorating their walls with joy, not dominance. Maybe that's the truest sign of their civilization, that they found beauty not in fear or conquest, but in movement, in color, in the endless conversation between sea and sky. You linger for a while, letting your thoughts drift. The sun begins to lean westward, the shadows stretching long across the tiles. Somewhere below, a bird calls, a sharp note that echoes in the silence. The terrace feels timeless now, suspended between centuries, waiting for someone to notice it again. And in this stillness, you feel the quiet intelligence of Minoan design surrounding you. Not grand, not ostentatious, but deeply human. You brush a bit of dust from your sleeve, stand, and take one last look around. The view, the air, the warmth of the stone beneath your feet, it's all part of a single design, ancient yet impossibly modern in its calm. You take a deep breath, ready to descend once more, carrying the hush of this upper world with you. You descend from the upper terraces, letting the warmth of the sun fade behind the high walls, and step back into the network of corridors that connect the palace's inner chambers. The air here feels different, cooler, grounded, as if the stones themselves remember every footstep that's ever passed across them. You notice the subtle slope of the floors, the way the corridors curve gently, never in harsh angles. It's a design meant to ease movement, to calm the body even as you walk. The Minoans seemed to understand that architecture could affect your mood without you even realizing it. Along one wall, the faint remnants of a fresco catch your eye. You can barely make out a procession of figures, their limbs elongated in a fluid, dance-like motion. The colors are muted now, soft ochre, faded blue, a hint of crimson, but they still convey a sense of rhythm and grace. The Minoans loved movement in their art, and that philosophy extended to their buildings. Every hallway, every stair, every doorway seems designed to flow naturally, guiding you from one space to the next without abrupt interruptions. It's the sort of layout that makes you unconsciously slow your pace, breathe deeper, and notice the subtleties of light and shadow. You step into a small chamber off the corridor, its walls lined with niches. This might have been a storage space for oils, perfumes, or fine cloths. You crouch to peer inside one niche and imagine the soft sheen of oils in clay jars, the subtle scent of herbs and flowers lingering in the air. The Minoans were connoisseurs of sensory experience, from the feel of stone underfoot to the texture of plastered walls, from the smell of incense to the play of sunlight through high windows. Even ordinary spaces were crafted to engage the senses gently. You run your fingers along a narrow ledge where tools may have once rested. Bronze chisels, wooden mallets, and small hammers would have been neatly arranged here, ready for artisans or household workers. In a way, the Minoans treated their tools with as much care as their living spaces. Another subtle reminder that work and life were inseparable, and that beauty could be found in function. Historians still argue whether such spaces were strictly utilitarian or carried ritual significance as well, perhaps sanctifying the labor performed within. Either interpretation feels plausible as you stand quietly in this sunlit chamber. Walking further, you enter a slightly larger room where the remains of a hearth cling to one corner. You kneel and brush the smooth stone with your hand, imagining flames once flickering here, dancing shadows across the walls, the warmth reaching every corner. Cooking and heating were integrated seamlessly into the Minoan layout, with smoke channels designed to vent discreetly while maintaining comfort. You can picture a family gathering around this hearth, the low murmur of conversation, the clatter of clay dishes, and the occasional soft laughter of children. A whimsical thought makes you smile. Some Minoan frescoes depict monkeys, dolphins, and even flying birds in domestic scenes. Perhaps the artists had a sense of humor, or perhaps they simply loved the world around them. You can almost imagine a small monkey perched near the hearth, mimicking human gestures, while a child giggles at its antics. It's a detail that reminds you these were real people, not just architectural concepts. Individuals with curiosity, playfulness, and attention to beauty in everyday life. The corridors lead you into another series of chambers that were likely bedrooms or private living quarters. The floors here slope subtly toward small drainage channels, evidence of the palace's advanced plumbing even in intimate spaces. Terracotta pipes would have carried water in and out, creating a level of comfort that seems surprisingly modern. You rest your hand on a raised platform, probably a bed base, and imagine the gentle layering of mats and linen atop it. A small niche above the bed might have held an oil lamp or a modest shrine, a place to quietly mark the passage of days and nights. You notice the layout encourages privacy without isolation. Small clusters of rooms surround open courtyards, allowing for light, air, and conversation to flow freely. There are no imposing walls to shut people off entirely, no harsh barriers, just a careful orchestration of space to balance communal life with personal retreat. Historians still debate whether this reflects the social structure of Minoan households, the status of women within the society, or simply a cultural preference for openness. Either way, walking through these spaces gives you an intuitive sense of their philosophy. Life should be lived in harmony, not in confinement. A light breeze drifts through a high window, carrying the scent of herbs and distant sea salt. You follow it into a small chamber that might have been used for crafting or study. The Minoans had a remarkable attention to detail. Small shelves built into walls, plastered surfaces smoothed for painting or writing, careful positioning of windows to catch light at just the right angle. You imagine someone grinding pigments, another weaving fabric, perhaps a child quietly tracing patterns in soft clay. Each activity is facilitated by the architecture itself. The palace becomes a tool, a partner in daily life. Some of the upper chambers still hint at color, faint reds, blues, and ochres, remnants of frescoes that once illustrated stories, rituals, or simple beauty. You can sense the effort that went into these decorations. The Minoans didn't decorate for status or intimidation, they decorated to enhance living. Even the smallest room could feel elevated, intimate, and thoughtful. A scholar might argue whether the frescoes carried symbolic meaning or were purely aesthetic, and you decide both are likely true. After all, isn't beauty often functional? You step toward a window overlooking the central court. Sunlight spills in, illuminating the worn stone floors and casting gentle shadows along the walls. You notice how the Minoans manage space. Pathways that guide you naturally, courtyards that collect light, rooms that breathe. Every detail seems intentional, every curve or angle serving both practical and aesthetic purposes. There's a soft hum in the air, almost imperceptible, as if the stones themselves are quietly reciting the wisdom of centuries. A strange, charming fact comes to mind. Archaeologists discovered traces of colored floor coatings, deep red, blue, and white, suggesting that even the floors were part of the visual narrative. You can picture moving across the room on a red or blue path, feeling the difference under your feet, experiencing color with each step. The Minoans designed for all senses, not just sight. You pause, taking in the room, the corridors, the distant glint of sea through the windows. There's a sense of continuity here, a quiet thread connecting private spaces, workshops, and communal areas. The architecture moves with you, envelops you, and even whispers. You can almost hear the palace exhaling, stretching gently in the afternoon warmth, alive yet patient, inviting you to notice its subtleties. You follow the soft curve of a corridor that leads you toward the eastern side of the palace, where the light filters differently, warmer, almost golden, as it touches the walls and floors in a way that seems deliberate. The Minoans were masters of subtle illumination, guiding the eye and the body through space without words or instructions. Even now, thousands of years later, you feel that rhythm, the gentle push of design directing your attention to courtyards, doorways, and terraces. Ahead, the corridor opens into a small courtyard. You step in, feeling the sun on your shoulders and the breeze coming off the distant sea. The floor here is worn smooth,
yet patterned in a way that suggests care rather than mere function. Perhaps this space was used for domestic gatherings, small rituals, or simply as a place to pause and enjoy the sun. You run your fingers along the edge of a shallow trough set into the stone, a small channel for water, maybe for washing, maybe ceremonial. The Minoans integrated water into nearly every part of their architecture, from grand central courtyards to these quiet, intimate spaces.
You imagine a Minoan child stepping into this courtyard centuries ago, barefoot, laughing as they trace the channels with their toes. Maybe a cat slinks by, watching them with keen curiosity. You can almost hear the faint clatter of pottery or the whisper of linen swishing in the wind. Life, it seems, was layered, work, play, ritual, and repose seamlessly intertwined. Historians still argue whether such spaces were primarily functional or primarily symbolic, but it hardly matters as you trace your hand along the worn stones. They feel alive, even now. You move toward a raised platform on one side of the courtyard, a step that leads into a chamber with narrow windows and a low, polished floor. The room is quiet, intimate, and you can almost picture it filled with soft lamplight. Perhaps it was a study, a place for scribes to work on linear A tablets, recording harvests, taxes, or other bureaucratic details. You crouch near the floor, imagining tiny marks pressed into wet clay, the soft scrape of a stylus, the quiet concentration of a worker centuries ago. The Minoans had a remarkable attention to acoustics, even in small rooms. You notice the gentle echo in this chamber, the way your own breathing sounds slightly different here than in the open courtyard. It's intentional, not to amplify noise, but to create a space that feels alive without overwhelming the senses. Every design choice seems calibrated to balance function and serenity, comfort and flow. As you continue, you pass a series of small niches carved into the walls. Perhaps these held lamps, perhaps offerings, or maybe just small tools or personal belongings. Their presence adds texture to the space, a subtle reminder that these rooms were lived in, not just designed. You pause before one of them, imagining an oil lamp glowing softly, flickering shadows across the smooth plaster. The warmth of the light would have been calming, a companion in the quiet hours of work or contemplation. A curious tidbit comes to mind. Some Minoan niches were painted in contrasting colors, red, blue, or even yellow, to subtly highlight their importance. Imagine a tiny splash of color in an otherwise muted room, drawing the eye just enough to feel noticed but not overwhelmed. Historians still debate whether these colors carried symbolic meaning or were purely aesthetic. But either way, it's a beautiful example of how deliberate their design was. Moving along, you enter a slightly larger chamber, perhaps a space for communal meals or craftwork. The floor slopes subtly toward a central drainage point, evidence of careful planning for spills, rainwater, or even ritual purification. You run your fingers along the edge of a sunken basin, noting the smooth polish from centuries of use. Imagine a table here, laden with fresh bread, olives, and wine, surrounded by people whose voices mingle with the faint scent of herbs and smoke. The Minoans were meticulous about sensory experience, and it shows in the smallest details: the placement of windows for optimal light, the integration of water, the careful slope of floors. These were spaces built not only for function, but for comfort, for daily life, for the little joys of movement and observation. You notice how easily your gaze follows the architecture, how naturally your body moves through it, evidence that design was always in conversation with human habit. You step out into a secondary courtyard, one of many throughout the palace, and pause. The play of shadow and light here is mesmerizing, the sun catching the edges of columns and terraces, casting geometric patterns on the ground. You imagine a small procession moving through this space, perhaps carrying offerings, perhaps just going about daily life. Their movements guided as much by the architecture as by intention. It's another reminder that every line, every angle, every surface was chosen to orchestrate human experience.
And then you notice something curious, a small carved spout protruding from a wall. Its shape resembles a lion's head, teeth bared in a stylized snarl. Water would have flowed through it during rains, a whimsical touch in the midst of utility. You can almost hear the water splashing into a hidden basin below, a private fountain for no one but the inhabitants. Such details suggest a playful side to Minoan design, the ability to combine function, symbolism, and delight in a single gesture.
Historians still debate whether features like these were purely decorative or had ritual significance. Perhaps both interpretations are true. Perhaps they didn't see the distinction as sharply as we do. In a way, that ambiguity is part of the charm. You smile at the thought, a civilization that built with both practicality and imagination, leaving traces that make you pause, wonder, and quietly admire. You wander to the far edge of the courtyard and glance back at the network of corridors you've explored. The way the spaces connect, the rhythm of walls and openings, the subtle slopes and gentle curves, it all feels intentional, not grandiose, not imposing, but harmoniously human. You realize again that the Minoans weren't trying to impress the world with sheer scale. They were trying to make life smoother, calmer, more beautiful. A faint breeze drifts through the open areas, carrying the distant hum of the sea and the faint smell of wild herbs. You breathe it in, letting it fill your senses, and notice the small pleasure of movement. Your own footsteps softly echoing across ancient stones, the sound blending with imagined echoes of a civilization long gone. You feel connected, in a quiet, unassuming way, to the architects, artisans, and inhabitants who shaped this palace. Even the smallest details here speak to intention. Rounded corners to avoid sharp edges, low benches carved into walls, subtly sloped surfaces for water management. Nothing is accidental. It's a reminder that architecture can be both practical and poetic, that spaces can nurture the body and the mind simultaneously. And as you stand in this courtyard, watching the sunlight play across stone and plaster, you feel a profound calm settle over you, the quiet intelligence of Minoan design, alive across millennia, whispering in gentle, unhurried tones. You move from the eastern courtyard back into a narrower corridor, the temperature shifting subtly as sunlight fades behind the high walls. The stones here are smoother, worn by centuries of passage, and the air feels slightly cooler, carrying a faint scent of the sea mingled with limestone and aged plaster. It's quiet, almost reverent, as though the walls themselves remember the footsteps of those who came before. You notice how the corridors curve gently, never harshly, guiding you almost imperceptibly toward the next chamber. The Minoans understood the psychology of movement. Even in spaces meant for utility, there's a rhythm, a brace that encourages calm. You step into a small chamber, the light entering through narrow slits, casting soft, angled patterns across the floor. It may have been a bedroom, a study, or perhaps a private meditation space. There's no way to know for certain, and historians still debate the function of many upper-level rooms. What you can perceive, however, is the attention to human experience, to comfort, to proportion, to light. You kneel and place your hand on the stone floor, feeling the subtle warmth retained from centuries of sun. Imagine a Minoan child or adult moving through this space daily, perhaps pausing to wash hands in a small basin tucked in the corner, the water flowing from a narrow clay pipe, just enough to refresh without extravagance. The chamber contains niches carved into the walls, likely for storage or display. Perhaps jars of oil or perfume, small personal objects, or ritual offerings. One niche catches your eye, its edges painted a faint red, barely discernible now, but still hinting at deliberate decoration. The Minoans blended utility and beauty effortlessly. Even spaces meant to contain mundane objects were treated with aesthetic care. You imagine a lamp burning softly in one of these niches at night, flickering shadows that danced along the walls, casting the room in gentle motion and soft illumination. A quirky detail surfaces in your mind. Some Minoan chambers had small holes in the walls near the ceiling, thought by some scholars to serve as rudimentary ventilation, others as channels for acoustic enhancement. You can picture someone whispering from one end of the room and hearing a faint echo at the other, perhaps an unintended effect, or perhaps a subtle design choice meant to enhance conversation or music. Historians still argue the purpose of these small features, and you enjoy the ambiguity, letting your imagination fill the gaps. Moving toward a slightly larger room connected by another short corridor, you notice the flooring has been carefully constructed with stone slabs fitted tightly together. In some areas, remnants of pigment remain, hints of red, blue, and ochre, evidence that even the floors were treated as canvases. You kneel and trace the rough outline of a pattern, imagining footsteps passing across these colors in long-ago sunlight. You picture women carrying woven textiles, children chasing each other between columns, or perhaps a priestess pausing mid-step to sprinkle a little oil for purification. The integration of artistry and daily life feels seamless, effortless, a philosophy embedded in stone. As you explore, you come across a small sunken basin, likely used for washing or ritual cleansing. Its edges are smooth, polished by time and use. You imagine water flowing through tiny clay conduits, filling the basin just enough to refresh, never overflowing, never wasteful. The Minoans were conscious of their resources, and this practical elegance is everywhere. Water wasn't merely functional, it was an element of comfort, of sensory delight. You crouch beside it, imagining hands cupping the cool liquid, feeling the connection between body, architecture, and environment. A light breeze enters through a high window, carrying the scent of thyme and distant sea salt. You follow it as it drifts through the corridors and into the next chamber, where the walls are smoother, more intimate. This room might have been for weaving or crafting. Small shelves built into the walls hint at storage for tools or materials. The Minoans understood that functionality and aesthetics could coexist. Imagine threads of gold and blue woven under sunlight streaming through the window, a quiet ritual of creation in an already harmonious space. Your gaze falls on the faint traces of a fresco along one wall, swirls of blue and white, perhaps representing water or sky. The Minoans loved movement, and it is evident in every curve, every line, every brushstroke. You notice how the shapes echo the flow of the corridors and terraces, a consistent philosophy carried from floor to ceiling, from courtyard to private chamber. Historians still debate the exact symbolism of these patterns, whether they depicted myth, ritual, or simple appreciation of natural forms. You decide it doesn't matter. The feeling of fluidity, grace, and harmony is what persists. As you stand in the center of this chamber, the air cool against your skin, your eyes follow the light as it shifts across the walls. You notice the way shadows fall, the gentle play of sunbeams through narrow openings. The Minoans, it seems, designed for perception, for the way light moves, for the experience of space over time. You imagine a quiet morning here, the sun rising and tracing its path along stone floors, walls, and niches, guiding inhabitants without instruction, without force, merely through presence. A faint smile tugs at your lips as you realize how much thought went into even the smallest details. The corners are rounded to prevent injury, the floors slightly sloped to drain water, the walls decorated not just for status but for serenity. Every aspect of the architecture reflects a philosophy, living in harmony with material, environment, and body. The Minoans did not need grandeur to impress. Their beauty is understated, calming, deliberate. From this chamber, You move toward an adjacent courtyard. Light spills in, catching fragments of colored plaster and the smooth curves of columns. The space feels open and airy, yet intimately enclosed, a paradox handled effortlessly by design. You pause to listen, imagining the soft hum of daily life, the scrape of clay, the low murmur of voices, the distant laughter of children. It is ordinary, yet extraordinary in its coherence. The architecture itself seems to guide movement, nurture activity, and calm the spirit simultaneously. You think about how modern designers strive for flow in buildings, using subtle cues to direct movement and mood. The Minoans achieved this millennia ago with stone, plaster, light, and air. They didn't need blueprints to create balance, they understood it intuitively. You follow the corridor out to the terrace above, letting the wind and light fill you with the quiet rhythm of the palace, the harmony of human scale meeting natural elements. And as you pause at the terrace, looking back over the interconnected chambers and courtyards, a soft realization settles in. This architecture is a conversation between human need and artistic expression, between function and delight, between past and present. Even in silence, it speaks, and you listen. You step back into the long, winding corridors that lead you toward the western side of the palace, the air cooler here, carrying the faint scent of stone and salt from the distant sea. The corridors feel quieter now, almost private, as if you've slipped into spaces meant for contemplation rather than movement. You notice the subtle gradients in the flooring, designed to channel water and gently guide your steps. Even now, after millennia, it seems as though the palace anticipates your presence, arranging itself around your path, inviting you to slow down and notice. A small doorway opens into a chamber that is modest in size but rich in character. The walls, once plastered and painted, now hold only faint traces of color: ochre, red, a whisper of cobalt blue. You kneel and trace the edge of a niche, imagining jars of oil or grains stored here long ago. The Minoans cared about the smallest details, blending utility with beauty. Even a storage space was treated with intention, adorned subtly to enhance the experience of daily life. Historians still argue whether some niches served ritual purposes, but you suspect it doesn't matter. The act of placing care into every corner is itself a ritual of living. You move further into the chamber and notice the floor, smooth yet subtly contoured. Tiny channels lead water gently toward a central drain, evidence of careful planning to handle rain, spills, or ceremonial purification. You crouch and let your hand hover above one channel, imagining cool water slipping silently beneath the stone, connecting to a larger network beneath the palace. The Minoans had a remarkable understanding of hydraulics, long before Roman aqueducts or plumbing systems. Their clever use of terracotta pipes and slope demonstrates a subtle genius, a harmony of function and quiet beauty. A curious thought crosses your mind. Some rooms in this wing show traces of foot traffic worn into the stone, suggesting habitual paths that guided residents and workers. Perhaps the palace itself dictated behavior, a silent choreography of daily life. You smile at the idea. Thousands of years ago, people were unknowingly following the architectural cues left by designers who understood rhythm, movement, and perception intuitively. Even the way sunlight slices through narrow windows seems to mark the passage of hours, a natural clock embedded in stone. You move into a slightly larger chamber that opens toward a small courtyard. The light here is softer, filtered through partially collapsed walls, casting muted patterns across the floor. Perhaps this space was used for private gatherings, quiet reflection, or craft work. The Minoans had a deep appreciation for light, not just illumination, but its quality, its movement, its interplay with architecture. Sunlight becomes a participant in the space, softening stone edges, highlighting color,
guiding the eye without command. A quirky detail comes to mind. Archaeologists found tiny holes in some walls, possibly used to hang small lamps or lanterns. Others suggest they may have functioned as perches for birds or even as miniature ventilation channels. Historians still debate these interpretations, leaving room for imagination. You envision a warm evening, a single oil lamp flickering in the chamber, casting shadows across the walls. A soft hum of life carried from the lower courtyards into this private, quiet space. You follow the corridor as it curves gently, stepping over subtle thresholds that mark transitions between areas. The Minoans were masters of flow, creating spaces that guide the body naturally without abrupt shifts. Each doorway, each niche, each step seems considered, designed to calm, to direct, to harmonize with both function and sensory experience. The palace itself becomes an accomplice in daily life, nurturing and shaping existence with invisible hands. You pause near a sunken basin in one of the rooms, its surface polished by centuries of use. Imagine water flowing into this space, the soft splash barely audible against the stone walls. Perhaps a priestess used it for ritual cleansing, or perhaps a child simply splashed to cool off on a warm day. Water was integrated into nearly every chamber of the palace, serving both practical and aesthetic purposes, a quiet symbol of life and renewal. As you move toward the western terrace, the sound of wind carries hints of distant waves, blending with imagined echoes of footsteps, conversation, and laughter from centuries past. You notice the way the palace opens to the horizon here, inviting the view in, letting the landscape participate in the architecture. The Minoans didn't separate themselves from nature. They framed it, celebrated it, and allowed it to shape daily experience. Some scholars suggest these western terraces might have been ceremonial, perhaps for observing the sun or stars, or even marking agricultural cycles. Historians still argue about the exact function, but it's clear that the Minoans valued alignment with natural forces, light, air, water, and horizon, integrating them seamlessly into daily life. You rest your hand on a low wall, feeling the warmth of sun-heated stone, and let your gaze drift over the distant hills, olive groves, and the shimmering sea. A subtle sense of calm settles over you. The palace is alive in its own quiet way, guiding, nurturing, and observing simultaneously. Even in its ruin, it retains an elegance that is both practical and poetic. Every slope, every niche, every channel for water or airflow was a deliberate choice, evidence of a civilization that sought harmony in all things. You imagine the Minoans moving through these spaces daily, unaware of the centuries that would pass, but confident in the comfort and logic of their design. As you walk back toward the inner corridors, the interplay of light and shadow catches your eye again. The stones beneath your feet feel warm and familiar. The air carries subtle hints of herbs and salt, and the soft curve of the walls seems to echo the rhythm of life itself. You realize that Minoan architecture was less about grandeur and more about presence, the presence of comfort, flow, and quiet intelligence. It's architecture that listens, responds, and shapes existence without ever demanding attention. You pause for a moment in the fading light, feeling the stillness, the subtle hum of the palace beneath your feet. The corridors, chambers, and courtyards form a continuous, breathing organism. Even in ruin, it instructs, comforts, and delights, whispering centuries of subtle wisdom. You step slowly forward, letting the experience settle into memory, carrying with you the profound sense of balance that the Minoans built into every stone, every channel, every sunlit corner. You make your way toward the northern wing of the palace, the corridors narrowing slightly as you move. The air here is cooler, carrying the faint scent of moss and aged stone,
a reminder of the quiet years since the palace thrived. Your footsteps echo softly, and you notice the gentle slope of the floors that seems to direct you forward, a subtle guidance woven into the very architecture. The Minoans understood the importance of movement, not just in grand spaces, but in corridors like this, ensuring the journey itself felt natural, unhurried, even calming. You pause before a small chamber set slightly off the main corridor. The walls are smooth and faintly painted in soft hues, ochre, pale blue, and a whisper of green. You kneel and trace the remnants of what might have been a fresco depicting a procession or ritual. The figures are elongated and fluid, their gestures captured mid-motion, almost as if they were dancing along the wall. You imagine the room alive long ago, oil lamps flickering, casting moving shadows across the painted walls, the faint hum of conversation, and the soft rustle of linen robes. Historians still debate whether these images were symbolic or purely decorative, but their effect is undeniable. Even in silence, the space feels animated, gently guiding your imagination. Stepping deeper into the chamber, you notice a low bench carved into the wall. It's polished smooth, the result of centuries of use. You imagine someone sitting here quietly, perhaps reading a tablet inscribed in linear A, tracing the stylus across wet clay, recording goods or rituals. The Minoans integrated work seamlessly into their living spaces, combining utility and comfort with elegance. Even private quarters carried this philosophy, designed to encourage both efficiency and reflection. A small niche near the corner draws your attention. You kneel closer and imagine it filled with a clay jar containing perfumed oil or an offering for a domestic deity. The attention to sensory detail in these private chambers is remarkable. Every niche, shelf, or recess was considered in relation to light, airflow, and movement. You can almost feel the deliberate care of ancient hands, smoothing plaster, painting subtle colors, arranging spaces to foster calm and quiet productivity. Moving into the adjacent room, you notice the flooring, a combination of stone slabs and plaster, worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Some areas still hint at pigment, faint reds and blues that once guided movement or marked boundaries within the room. You crouch and trace the outline of a shape, imagining it catching sunlight through a narrow slit. Perhaps it was a space for weaving, for teaching children, or simply for quiet contemplation. The design encourages engagement with the space, guiding the eye and body naturally, without force. A curious detail comes to mind. Archaeologists discovered small holes near the ceiling. Some believe these functioned as ventilation, others as acoustic enhancers, or even as symbolic channels for spiritual communication. Historians still debate their purpose, and that ambiguity feels fitting. A gentle reminder that the Minoans left room for interpretation, for curiosity, for imagination. You imagine standing beneath one of these small holes, feeling a draft of air, and wondering what ancient hands once passed through the same motion. You move to a larger, more open chamber, possibly used for communal work or gatherings. Its floor slopes subtly toward a central drain, evidence of careful planning for water or cleaning. The space feels calm, yet alive. Every curve, every niche, every opening designed to encourage flow, to balance light and shadow, to harmonize activity with comfort. You pause and imagine the sound of children playing, the scrape of tools, or the gentle murmur of conversation, all moving in rhythm with the architecture itself. Sunlight filters through a series of small windows, casting shifting patterns across the walls and floor. The Minoans were masters of light, orchestrating its movement through space to enhance comfort and perception. Even in a room used for daily labor, sunlight would provide a subtle guide, marking the passage of hours and the rhythm of life. You notice the way shadows stretch and recede, creating an ever-changing tapestry that draws attention without commanding it.
You picture a small monkey, one of the many animals depicted in Minoan frescoes, leaping playfully along the windowsill. Its presence reminds you that life in the palace wasn't all work or ritual. There was humor, play, and companionship woven into everyday experience. You smile at the thought, the imagined sounds of tiny paws tapping across stone merging with the hum of wind through narrow openings. As you wander toward the northern terrace, the corridor opens slightly, allowing a view of distant hills, olive groves, and the glimmering sea. The terrace is modest but thoughtful, offering a connection to the natural world. The Minoans framed vistas carefully, allowing inhabitants to experience the landscape as an extension of the palace itself. You step out, letting the breeze carry the faint scent of salt and thyme, and pause to imagine the daily rhythm here. Work, reflection, play, all punctuated by the quiet presence of nature. Historians still debate whether northern terraces had ceremonial functions, perhaps related to agricultural observation, seasonal rituals, or astronomical events. Regardless of their original purpose, the spaces feel meditative now, designed to foster calm, awareness, and connection with the environment. You lean against a low stone wall, the surface warm from the sun, and let your gaze drift over the distant horizon, imagining the lives once guided by the rhythm of sun, wind, and sea. You step back into the corridor and continue moving slowly, savoring the subtle craftsmanship of the walls, floors, and niches. Every space you encounter reflects careful planning. Rounded corners to avoid injury, gentle slopes to channel water, natural light to illuminate without glare. The Minoans created spaces that work in harmony with human perception, subtly orchestrating comfort and calm without the need for ornamentation or force. As you traverse these northern corridors, the quiet hum of the palace seems to envelop you. The northern wing, less grand than central courts, but rich in intimate design, exemplifies the Minoan philosophy. Life and architecture intertwined, function elevated by beauty, and comfort given as a subtle art. Even centuries later, the spaces retain their elegance and tranquility, quietly guiding every step, every glance, every breath. You continue along the northern corridor, moving toward the far end of the palace, where the architecture becomes even more intimate, almost secretive. The stones beneath your feet are cool, the air heavier with the scent of aged plaster and the faint, lingering hint of herbs that might have been stored here centuries ago. It's a quieter space, one that seems designed for reflection rather than activity. You notice the gentle curves in the walls, the way doorways are framed to guide your gaze toward light, shadow, or an inviting terrace. The Minoans clearly understood that architecture could shape mood as much as movement. A small chamber opens to your left, modest in size but crafted with precision. Its walls are smooth, painted in muted tones: ochre, pale blue, a soft green. You crouch and run your fingers along a shallow niche, imagining at once holding a jar of oil, a small offering, or a treasured object. Even in these private spaces, utility and aesthetics merge seamlessly. Historians still debate whether such chambers were primarily for living, working, or ceremonial purposes. But as you trace the contours of the room, it feels as though the purpose is less important than the intention behind its design. Moving deeper, you notice the floors are slightly sloped toward a narrow channel that leads to a hidden drain. The Minoans were meticulous with water management, integrating subtle engineering into even the smallest chambers. You imagine water flowing quietly through this system, cooling the floors in summer, removing spills, and maintaining hygiene, all while remaining unobtrusive. It's a testament to their ability to merge practical function with comfort and aesthetics, an elegance that whispers rather than shouts. Sunlight filters in through narrow slits high on the walls, creating shifting patterns across the floor. You watch as the light moves slowly, changing the room's mood over the hours.
This careful choreography of natural light is something historians still debate. Was it purely practical, or did it carry symbolic or ritual significance? Either way, it affects you now, inviting you to slow your pace, soften your breath, and notice the subtle beauty of each detail. A curious detail catches your eye. A small carved spout extends from the wall, reminiscent of a lion or bull, its features worn by centuries of exposure. Water would have flowed from it into a basin below, perhaps for cleansing, refreshment, or ritual. Scholars still argue over the function of such features, and you smile at the mystery, imagining children discovering it, laughing as water splashed onto stone, or a priestess pausing to offer a quiet gesture of thanks. These little touches show a civilization that blended practicality, playfulness, and reverence with remarkable ease. You move into a slightly larger chamber adjacent to the small room, feeling the temperature shift subtly as sunlight warms the stone. This room may have served as a craft space, study, or even a private dining area. The walls are painted with faint patterns, curves that echo the natural world, the ocean, and animal forms. The Minoans integrated movement and life into every surface. You can almost hear the soft scrape of tools, the gentle hum of conversation, or the distant clatter of pottery. Sounds long gone, but present in the rhythm of the space. The corridors leading onward curve gently, and you notice how each doorway frames the next space, guiding movement naturally. Even the smallest details, like rounded corners or subtly raised thresholds, shape your perception. Walking through the palace feels like moving in dialogue with the architecture, each element nudging your attention toward light, air, or horizon. You think about how modern architects strive to achieve flow in buildings. The Minoans accomplished it intuitively thousands of years ago. A whimsical thought makes you smile. In some of the frescoes found nearby, dolphins and monkeys appear playfully among humans, suggesting that even in these quiet chambers, life was infused with humor and curiosity. You imagine a small animal moving along the floor as someone carries a jar, the air filled with soft laughter. These details remind you that Minoan life was not rigid or austere. It was sensory, playful, and mindful, even within structured spaces. As you reach the northern terrace, the palace opens to the landscape beyond. Olive groves, terraced fields, and the glimmering sea stretch out before you. The Minoans designed these vantage points to harmonize interior and exterior, architecture and nature. You lean against the low stone wall, letting the breeze carry hints of salt and herbs. The space feels both protective and expansive, a threshold between the structured palace and the living world outside. Historians still debate whether terraces were primarily ceremonial, observational, or purely recreational, but their beauty is undeniable. You notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow across columns and low walls, the gentle slope of the floor guiding your steps without notice, the careful integration of water channels and niches. Each element seems calibrated to support daily life while inspiring calm, reflection, and subtle delight. The palace is both functional and meditative, teaching lessons about rhythm, flow, and harmony without uttering a single word. Standing here, you take a deep breath and let the quiet envelop you. The northern wing of the palace, once bustling with unseen activity, now communicates through space, light, and subtle design. Even in ruins, it conveys comfort, intelligence, and a playful attention to detail. Walking these corridors, pausing in sunlit chambers, and observing the terrace, you feel a connection across millennia, a conversation between human perception and the timeless wisdom of Minoan architecture. You follow the final stretch of corridors, moving toward the southern wing of the palace, where the sunlight warms the stones more gently, and the distant sea glimmers faintly on the horizon. The corridors here feel expansive, yet intimate, a paradox handled masterfully by Minoan design. You notice how every curve, every subtle slope, and every doorway seems intended to harmonize with human movement, guiding you naturally without abrupt transitions. Even after thousands of years, you sense a quiet intelligence in the layout, a rhythm that soothes as much as it directs. Entering a series of small chambers along this wing, you pause to examine the walls and floors. Faint traces of pigments remain, pale reds, blues, and ochres, worn by centuries but still whispering the care that went into their application. You imagine these rooms as private quarters or workspaces, filled with the subtle hum of daily life, the scrape of a stylus on clay, the soft rustle of textiles, and the muted voices of inhabitants carrying out their routines. Historians still debate the exact purposes of some rooms, whether domestic, ritual, or craft-oriented, but the intention of comfort and efficiency is clear. A shallow basin catches your attention in one chamber, its edges polished smooth by centuries of use. Perhaps water once flowed through a narrow conduit into this basin, cooling the floor, facilitating hygiene, or even playing a role in ritual. You crouch and run your fingers along the edge, imagining the hands of the Minoans who touched this stone before you. Every element of the palace seems designed for multi-sensory engagement. The texture of stone, the movement of air, the play of light, subtly guiding inhabitants toward calm and harmony. Moving into a slightly larger room, you notice niches built into the walls. They likely held lamps, jars, or offerings, integrating utility with aesthetic care. Some of these niches are painted, others remain plain, but all contribute to a sense of structure and order. A whimsical detail comes to mind. Certain frescoes depict monkeys, dolphins, or even leaping bulls amidst human figures, suggesting that play and observation of nature were integral to daily life. You smile, picturing a small monkey mimicking the gestures of a Minoan artisan, unnoticed but fully present in the rhythm of the space. The corridors lead you to an open courtyard bathed in soft sunlight. Its floor is subtly sloped toward channels that would have carried water efficiently without disrupting movement. You imagine daily life here, the quiet murmur of conversations, the clatter of pottery, perhaps children playing while adults worked nearby. The integration of water, light, and movement demonstrates the Minoans' mastery of environmental design, creating spaces that are at once functional, aesthetic, and emotionally calming. Historians still debate whether such courtyards had ceremonial significance, but their elegance is undeniable. You ascend a few shallow steps to a terrace overlooking the central areas of the palace. From here, you can see the rhythm of the architectural layout: open courtyards, flowing corridors, interconnected chambers, and sunlit terraces. The Minoans framed these views intentionally, balancing enclosure with openness, privacy with community, and structure with natural light. You notice how shadows move across the stone surfaces as the day progresses, marking the passage of time in a subtle, almost meditative fashion. A final chamber on the terrace draws your attention. Its floor is slightly raised, perhaps used for sitting or observing, with a low wall carved along its edge. You imagine resting here, feeling the sun on your shoulders, the breeze carrying the scent of time and distant salt water. The space invites pause, reflection, and quiet observation, a perfect conclusion to the journey through the palace's intricate and gentle architecture. Now, as you slowly begin to wind down your exploration, the Minoan palace leaves a lasting impression. Every corridor, every niche, every sunlit terrace reflects a philosophy of living that combines practicality, beauty, and subtle sensory guidance. Even centuries later, these spaces continue to teach lessons about rhythm, harmony, and the quiet joys of everyday life. You feel the hum of the palace beneath your feet, the lingering warmth of sun-soaked stone, and the gentle cadence of air flowing through open courtyards. Take a deep breath and let your thoughts drift. The corridors, chambers, and terraces have guided you not through grandiosity or drama, but through calm, intention, and care. You feel connected to the past, to the hands that smoothed plaster, arranged niches, and painted walls with playful animals and flowing motifs. The Minoans understood that architecture is not merely a shelter, it is a companion, shaping experience, mood, and perception with subtle intelligence. As the light fades in your imagination and the palace settles into quiet, let yourself relax fully. Picture the cool stones under your hands, the gentle flow of water in hidden channels, the warmth of sunlit terraces, and the playful whispers of dolphins or monkeys in frescoes long faded. Feel the rhythm of the space, calm and enduring, and carry it into the soft spaces of your own mind. Slow your breathing. Let your eyelids feel heavy, and imagine the palace stretching gently in silence, cradling you in its quiet wisdom. Every detail, every thoughtful curve and slope guides you toward peace. Let your mind drift along corridors, across terraces, through chambers, and into the gentle hush of Minoan evenings. You are safe, you are calm, and you are quietly accompanied by the lasting elegance of a civilization that knew how to live with grace and mindfulness. Now, as you rest in this imagined space, allow the gentle cadence of your own breath to mirror the slow rhythm of the palace. The sun has dipped low, casting soft shadows across stone and plaster, and the air carries the faint scent of herbs and distant sea. You feel yourself sink into the ease of movement, the calm flow of corridors, the subtle guidance of light and shadow. Each step, each glance, each imagined touch is a quiet invitation to let go of tension and simply be. The terraces, chambers, and courtyards fade into gentle abstraction, leaving only sensations. The cool stones under your hands, the faint hum of air through open spaces, the soft trickle of imagined water in hidden channels. Even the playful echoes of monkeys, dolphins, and dancing figures become a comforting lullaby, a reminder that life is both structured and whimsical. You are part of this rhythm now, carried effortlessly along the thoughtful design of centuries past. Let your mind drift further, allowing the palace to dissolve into calm imagery, each detail softening, each line blurring into a peaceful whole. There is no hurry, no tension, only the gentle flow of space and time. The Minoan wisdom lingers quietly, that beauty, function, and care can coexist in harmony, guiding your senses and your spirit toward ease. Feel the final warmth of the sun, the gentle shift of the breeze, and the enduring quiet of stone and water. Allow yourself to sink completely into this calm, carrying it into the edges of your mind, softening the day and inviting a peaceful rest. You are safe. You are still. You are quietly cradled by the past and the serene architecture that continues to whisper across the centuries. Sweet dreams.